Hey everybody, we're back for a video, and this video is probably going to create a lot of controversy and a lot of noise. But if you're one of my followers, you know the kind of videos I do. If you're new to seeing this type of video I'm doing, just hang on, we're going to have some fun. So a little bit about myself real quick. My obsession is giant scale aircraft, okay? And it's electric, okay? It's got to be over 150 inches. It's just been my obsession for over 12 years is to design and build electric aircraft. And by doing that, I've designed a lot of my own systems and tested my own systems. And I mean, I went as far as building my own carbon fiber props for a J Series C-130. This is a carbon fiber 6-bladed prop I designed and made myself. And I've done all kinds of videos on testing LiPos, the internal resistance, the C ratings. I just love everything electric, but I love to dissect it and understand the science behind it and the engineering. And one thing that really, really burns me is when people start saying stuff that's not factual, like a lithium polymer battery can just instantly, spontaneously combust. You know, I have over 14,000 charges on Lipo batteries. I've never had one fire because I know how to charge. I know how to monitor my battery. I know how to balance charge. If you follow the rules, Lipos are extremely safe. Now, haters come out and say, oh, there's no way you have 14,000 charges. This airplane, hopefully you're seeing over here, has about 1,400 flights, has 6 Lipos on it, 4 flight packs, and 2 for the radio system. So take 6 times 1,400, that adds up. I've got a lot of other ones that have 6 to 8 Lipos on it, and each flight is 6 to 8 charges. So the reason I'm doing this video is about discharging your battery for disposal, okay? And about a week ago, no, actually it's 3 weeks ago, there was some stuff going on and some things on Facebook where somebody says you can't do the saltwater method, it's dangerous. I'm going to block you from posting that you can't use a saltwater method because you're misguiding people because it's dangerous. And that really, really tweaked me because 3 years ago, I did a boatload of testing on LiPos in saltwater, but unfortunately I didn't record all of it because I never thought one day I'd have to have all that data. So guess what I've done for the last 14 days from about 8 o'clock at night until midnight? I reran almost all my tests, over 42 different tests on how lithium polymers react in salt water and what's really going on there. So what I really want to emphasize here is a friend of mine, this happened a year ago, he reached out to me, and keep in mind, there's a lot of people reach out to me in electrics because there's so much noise out there. There's so many people that misguide people. They tell them to use a wrong C rating for a glider, or they tell them to use the wrong number of cells for a motor that's not designed to handle that, or for the ESC that clearly can't handle that kind of amperage. So there's all this noise out there in electric, and people are like, well, where do I go to really get the facts? So, like I said, 3 years ago, I did some really deep testing on Lipos to try to understand everything about them, including how to dispose of them, how to discharge them and dispose of them. So a friend of mine last year called me up and said, dude, I just about burned my house down. I'm like, what are you talking about? He goes, well, I was over, I think he said on RC groups, and somebody had told him you can't use salt water because it's dangerous. But you should try this. And they gave him a link to this guy who builds these resistors. So he tried to build this resistor thing to discharge his battery down to 0, okay, for disposal. And it caught on fire. I mean, 3 kids, 2 dogs, and I think some fish could have died because somebody said the salt water method was dangerous, okay? So what we're going to dive into is some different methods first before I start showing you all my testing, because I redid 42 tests over the last 2 weeks. I'm not going to make you watch all 42. I'm going to share with you the ones that I think are important. So how can you discharge a lithium polymer battery? You can put a load on it, like put lamps on it. And what I mean by lamps is you could put a 12 volt 50 watt bulb on a 3S battery, and that will run it down to 0. Or you could take 2 of those in series and get 24 volts out of it and use it to run down like a 5 or a 6 cell. You can use a saltwater method, and I'm going to explain to you why it does work if you know what you're doing. Some chargers will take batteries to 0 volts, but mine doesn't because it's afraid I would accidentally destroy a good lithium polymer. Some people will drive a nail through the cell, and then you can also drop it off at a disposal site. I think Menards and Lowe's and Home Depot and some of those places take lithium polymer batteries. So now we're going to talk a little bit, and you're going to hopefully see some pictures up here. I'm going to dig into a little bit about what are the tabs on a lithium polymer battery. Okay, somebody posted 2 weeks ago that I've done this stuff for 20 years. I understand how the LiPo tabs can rust, and I understand everything about rust. Well, first of all, rust only works with iron. Okay, lithium polymer tabs, one tab's aluminum, the other tab could be coppered, coated with tin and silver. It could be nickel. Okay, most lithium polymers that I've tested and cut up, my light just moved. Most lithium polymers that I have tested have a aluminum on the anode or the positive, and has a copper which is coated with tin and silver. Some really high-end ones have nickel there. Okay, so let's talk about what happens in regular water. Okay, and hopefully over here you'll see a test I ran where I took a dead LiPo, put the tabs in both plain water and salt water for 14 days, and guess what? Nothing happens. Okay, nothing happens. It takes 6 to 12 months for the regular water to start affect aluminum, and affect tin it virtually never will. Okay, so that's not what's causing the tabs to erode off. It's not the water. So then I go into salt water for 14 days. And my test in the salt water is anywhere from a 1/16 of a teaspoon per 2 cups of water, all the way up to a tablespoon of salt per 2 cups of water, which is an enormous salinity level if you really want to measure that for salinity. Guess what? After 2 weeks, nothing happened to the tabs. Okay, nothing at all. So hopefully over here, now what we're going to do is we're going to forget the tabs for a minute. Okay, we've talked about the tabs. We know the tabs are not affected by salt water or regular water. Okay, they are if they're under a current. And I'll talk about that toward the end of this video. But let's talk about salinity testing. So over here, you're going to see some salinity test. And I went with a 1/16 tablespoon, a 1/8 tablespoon, a 1/4 tablespoon, a 3/8 tablespoon, a half tablespoon, a 0.625, which is what, 5/8 of a teaspoon, a 3/4 of a teaspoon, what would be it, 7/8 of a teaspoon, 1 teaspoon, and then 1.125 teaspoons per 2 cups of water. Okay, so hopefully over here you're seeing some of these tests being run. So the 1/16 of a teaspoon, I had 0.10 amps was the load. That's about 0.37 grams of salt per 2 cups of water. Okay, then when I went to 1/8 of a teaspoon, that's 0.74 grams of salt, and I saw 0.25 amp load. When I went to a 1/4 teaspoon, which is 1.48 grams of salt per 2 cups of water, I saw a 0.5 amp load. When I went to 3/8 of a teaspoon, which is 2.22 grams of salt, I ended up at 1 amp load. Okay, so as you see the salinity is going up, so is the load, the conductivity of the water. When I went to the 5/8, which is 3.7 grams of salt, I had 1.95 amps. And there's also a weird exponential thing that starts going on here, which I don't understand. Okay, I'm trying to put this in layman terms, but there is an exponential growth in amperage as the salinity goes up, and I'm not smart enough to know what it is. So 0.75 teaspoon, which is 4.44 grams, I saw 2.3 amps. At 0.875 teaspoon, which is 5.81 grams, I saw 2.78 amps. At 1 teaspoon, which is 5.92 grams of salt, I saw 3.48 amps. And then at 1.125 teaspoons, which is 6.66 grams of salt, I saw 7.7 amps. Okay, so you are starting to get a lot of conductivity going there, a lot of load going there, okay? But what's really going on to cause a tab to erode off a LiPo where all these people say the LiPo will never discharge once that tab is gone? So that's the myth, okay? I read where 4 or 5 people posted and said it's so dangerous to use salt water because it does not discharge the battery. So you're going to see some testing over here, okay? So your positive is an anode and your negative is a cathode if you're doing electrolysis, where you're sticking 2 probes into water and with the different salinity levels, you're going to get different conductivity levels. But also, the stronger the electrolysis is going on, the faster it will attack aluminum. It doesn't touch the nickel and it doesn't touch the tin and silver coating over the copper. And if you have bare copper, it doesn't attack the copper. It will slowly attack the copper, but the aluminum will go on the positive side much, much faster. Now, I never tested putting copper on the positive side and aluminum on the negative side to see how fast the copper would erode away, because I have not found a single lithium polymer yet that has copper on the positive tab. Okay? So, only when electrolysis is present does the aluminum start to eat away. And you'll see some videos over here. So on what you should be seeing over here right now was a test where basically I ran no salinity with a battery that was at 3.7-ish volts, which is kind of like storage. And then that same battery at a very high salinity level, okay, a tablespoon, which is 2 teaspoons, I think, or 3. So I put in a boatload of salinity, just a crap load of salinity in there to see what the reaction would be, okay? Versus the no salinity, high salinity. And I also used a smaller tab on the negative so I could get a better reaction out of the aluminum positive side. Then I did the same test at 4.2 volts, which the foil eroded away. And I used foil because it takes the aluminum about 20 minutes to completely dissolve. Okay, and you should see me pop up a little video over here of an actual tab falling off too. But let's think about this for a minute. We have 3.7 volts versus 4.2, and the 4.2 with the same salinity level ate away the aluminum quicker, which means the higher the voltage. Now, some of my testing, and look, I'm not going to show you all my testing. This would be a 3-hour video. I'm trying to keep these videos around 10 or 15 minutes. But here's the thing. When you watch this video of that tab falling off, you'll still notice there's bubbles coming off the negative, the cathode. That means there's still electrolysis presence, even with that tab gone. But think about your battery for a minute. We never throw away a good battery. Okay, if you're destroying a battery, it's because the internal resistance is way up in the stratosphere, and the battery's just not holding voltage anymore. Okay, it's just not lasting very long. But what is internal resistance? Internal resistance, high internal resistance, makes it hard for you to get a good current out of the battery, right? I mean, if you've ever done any internal resistance testing like I have, you take a brand new battery that's got an internal resistance or 2 or 3 and throw a load on it. Oh, and the way I throw a load on it is this thing here. I designed this to test all my batteries. I'm not sure what I got it set up for right now. Let's see what happens. Maybe I'll blow something up. But this right here is set up for 24 volts right now. But when you take and put a load on a battery that has low internal resistance, you'll see the 4.2 drop down to like 3.9 or 4.0. If you have a high internal resistance and you drop a load on it, it will go down to 3.2 or 3.4 volts. So it won't let the current out of the battery as quick. So what happens when you throw an old battery into salt water that has a massive salinity level? That positive tab will erode away in probably 2 to 3 minutes. But then there's the people that say, well, once that tab's gone, the discharging stops. No, it doesn't. People have said that that little slit, which is about 1/64 of an inch big, that tab thickness is about 1/64 of an inch, that when that tab falls off, this seals shut. That defies physics. What force is going on to close that what closes that tight enough to become an insulator? Nothing. So imagine taking a piece of shrink tube with a wire through it, pull the wire out of the shrink tube. Does the shrink tube collapse? No. The shrink tube is going to stay right where it's at, even though it's only 1/64 of an inch. If you look at that negative tab, you still see bubbles coming off it, which means there is still electrolysis going on. But let's think about this for a minute. You have a really high internal resistance, which means the current's going to come out of that battery really slow. Most of the tab's gone on the positive. So I did 5 different tests on 5 different cells, and with the tab gone, with a normal salinity level, it can take 3 weeks for that cell to completely drain to zero. That's what my testing did 3 years ago. This last 2 weeks, I still had milliamps after 14 days left in a couple of cells. And you'll see some of those cells over here. So where I'm getting at with this is that if you throw your LiPos into a bucket of salt water that's got a massive salinity level, okay, it's going to eat that tab right off, and it could take 3 weeks for that battery to get all the way to zero. I did testing where I took 5 gallons per 1 teaspoon of salt and still had enough current that the tab lasted a day before it eroded off. And in that day, the battery was down to almost milliamps. So if you're putting a boatload of salt in there, that tab's going to eat right off, and that battery might take 3 weeks to dissolve. Now, I had 3 different people reach out to me and says, hey, Dag, do you realize that the Army proving grounds and all the military proving grounds, how we dispose of our LiPos? Buckets of salt water. There's manufacturers, and I'll show it to you over here, that actually explain to you how to use salt water. Okay? Now, me personally, if I was going to use salt water, which I don't because I can use this, I can destroy any LiPo in like 8 minutes with this thing. If I was going to do salt water, I would drain the battery down to 3.7. I would slit the side of the cells open, throw it in the salt water, and literally within 8 hours, it is dead. Okay? But there's a lot of other ways to do this without using salt water. That's the reason. Look, I also did a poll. Okay, I have a Facebook group full of my nerd friends. I call it my information systems group. And these are basically aerospace and total electric nerds. I did a poll and said, how many people use salt water? How many people put a load on a lamp? How many people put a nail through LiPo? One person said they put a nail, 2 people said they put a nail through a LiPo underwater. Never heard that. And one of my friends takes a 12-gauge shotgun, goes out in his farm and shoots his LiPos. He says it's pretty green colors. So here's something to think about. 54.8% of my nerd friends still use salt water. 29% use LiPo with a lamp or a load on it. 6.5% use a nail put through the LiPo. 6.5% use a nail through the LiPo underwater. And then that one person does the 12-gauge. So my point here is there's a lot of other options in using salt water. Okay, you can buy chargers that will discharge to zero. I don't own one. You can dispose of these things at like Lowe's and Home Depot. There's a lot of places you can dispose of your LiPos at. But if you've got a bucket of water with like a tablespoon of salt in it, and I'm talking about household salt, the water softener salt takes a lot longer to dissolve, and I'll go into those tests one day. I don't want this video to go on because I did 42 tests, and I used salt water. I used table salt, Morton table salt, and I used 2 different types of water softener salt, pellets versus the grains or whatever, granules or whatever it's called. But I'm just making sure I got everything I wanted to touch base here. So look, everybody, at the end of this, I'm going to run all about 40 seconds of each of my tests at the end of this video so you can all see what the different current levels were with the different salinities and everything that went on, okay? I don't want this video going forever. I made my own units for testing, so everything you see here I built myself, and it's easy to do. I do want to warn you, just like you saw at the beginning of this video, when you put a cathode and electrode into water, you're making oxygen and hydrogen. When you put it into salt water, you're making hydrogen and chlorine gas. It's very small amounts. I never noticed anything, any nose irritation, eye irritation, everything, but I have a shop where I keep it very well vented. So please, for God's sakes, if you're going to try to do any of these tests yourselves, understand that salt water with an anode and a cathode in there. Did I say electrode earlier? I should have said anode. With an anode and a cathode in there, you're making chlorine gas and hydrogen. And just be careful. Don't do it, by the way. Okay, a lot of people don't know how to do this stuff without blowing themselves up anyway. But that's it, everybody. I hope I addressed everything. At the end here, you'll see a bunch of my different tests I ran. All I'm trying to do is get fact out there and get some science, okay? Now, I'm sure there will be people disagree with me. Some people still think the earth is flat, okay? And I may have scientifically maybe missed some things a little bit. I'm trying to speak in layman terms here. But the bottom line is, if manufacturer recommends salt water, if the military uses salt water, if 54% of my friends use salt water, if I know how to use salt water, it will work. I guess what I don't understand is, how could it be dangerous? Because one of these, I'm trying not to call people names, okay? I'm trying to be very positive here. But people on these blogs say the battery can instantly explode when you throw it into water. Just so you know, just so you understand, I have owned hundreds of LiPos. Most of my LiPos get about 350 flights before I have to get rid of them, okay? So I normally end up with about 15 LiPos a year that I can trash, throw away. I've dropped them from the ceiling to show that they don't explode when they hit the ground. Unless you're hitting, if you drop them like this, 10 drops, none of my LiPos caught on fire. Drop them like this, 7 out of 10 will catch on fire. But throwing them into water, I've never had one do anything just throwing them into water. So the people are saying they will blow up. You need to show the facts. You need to show your science. You need to show your testing to show how you blew up a LiPo by throwing it in water. So that's it, everybody. I hope you enjoy this video. I am going to do a video about designing and building this thing. I had something like this a couple of years ago that used some 12-volt carb lights, but I didn't give me the, these are all patch bays where I can patch my different loads and different watts. I can go up to 2,000 watts on this, and I can go up to 36 volts. And you take a 2200 3-cell, which is about, to be at its true 25C is about 70 or 80 amps, and you throw 150 amps on this, and you'll realize why batteries swell. So rock on, everybody. Have an awesome time. I hope you enjoy my videos. And all I'm trying to do is just get some science out there, people. Take care, everybody. Be safe.